Talking about avoiding bias today. So I've been talking about bias a little bit in the last few lessons. Okay, bias is defined as an unintended influence on data gathering method. Okay. In my opinion, it could be unintended or it can be intended. You just don't want any bias when you're gathering data. That's why we have all those sampling techniques, okay, so that we are not actually selecting anybody or anything. We're just using a certain method. Okay. There's different types of biases that exist. The first one we call sampling bias. Sampling bias is when the chosen sample does not accurately represent the population. So if you're not accurately representing the population, you're not taking into account everybody in that population. For example, if I wanted to find out something about, let's say, I want to find people's opinions on, what can I ask? People's opinions on a math club. Okay. And I only went to and surveyed people in math, in like grade 12 math classes where it's an optional course. Did I represent everybody in the school? No, I'm not representing other people's opinions. I'm going to as an actual biased group. They're going to give me a certain opinion, right? If I'm talking about a whole population and I go directly just to one group, I'm not accurately representing them. Non-response bias, this one's easy usually to identify. Okay, it's when surveys are not returned. Okay, this influences the whole population. Okay, so if you're directing surveys or you're doing something and you don't get the results back, then you're influencing the whole population. So you might have made sure that you don't have sample bias by giving surveys to the right people, but then you'll have a non-response bias. Household bias is when one type of respondent is overrepresented or underrepresented. So, because grouping at different sizes are polled equally. So the difference between this and sampling. Okay, so a lot of times this is where people get confused between the sampling and the household. Sampling, you're just not accurately reflecting the population. This one, you're probably, like, if I take that math example again, and I went to all the classes, okay, all the grades, okay, I asked about the math club. If I ask the same amount from each grade, then I'm not necessarily pulling them effectively. I'm overrepresenting some grades that maybe are smaller and underrepresenting some grades that are probably larger. Okay. So this is when you pull it equally. Okay. So it's important you understand the difference between these two. Okay. How can I fix household bias. What's the sampling technique that would make sure that we don't have household bias? Yeah.
Ask how many members, or like figure out how many members are per like group.
How many members there are per group? Yeah. And what's the sampling technique we learned for that yesterday?
There's multiple sampling techniques that
That groups. Yeah. But what was the first one? Not the simple one. The stratified. You know, not systematic. Stratified. Stratified puts them into groups, and then it makes sure stratified you have to pull them based on the size of the population, right? So you're taking the percentage of the group that it represents as a whole. Okay, so stratified sampling should fix or avoid household bias, I should say avoid. Okay. And then there's what's called response bias. When factors in the sampling method, example, poor questioning, design, interview tone, and attitude influence the results, when a participant is in a survey deliberately gives false or misleading answers. Okay. So that's where the surveyor or the questions are kind of trying to guide you or persuade you to answer a certain way. Okay. Or if someone's interviewing you, they're kind of giving you a tone that makes you either feel pressure to answer a certain way, or they're kind of trying to persuade you. So that's called response bias. So we're going to go through some examples. Again, so sampling bias, when you don't reflect the population, so you're missing people that you should be surveying. Okay. Non-response is when surveys are not returned, so you're not getting the answers from all the population or the sample that you've selected. Household is different than sampling because you're underrepresenting or overrepresenting people. Okay. Because you pull them equally. Okay. You can fix that using the proper sampling technique. And then response bias is when the survey questions or the interviewing is influencing your results. Yes.
I'm assuming we're going to be doing a survey next week.
We're going to do?
I'm assuming we're going to be doing a survey pretty soon.
Classify the type of bias in each of the following scenarios and suggest how the survey process could be changed to eliminate the bias. Okay, so we got to classify, and then we're going to suggest how we can change to eliminate bias. A survey asked students at a high school football game whether a fund for extracurricular activities should be used to buy new equipment for the football team or instruments for the school band. What's wrong with this? Which bias would this be? Peter? Sampling, right. It's not household because they've only gone to one group. Okay. They haven't over and underrepresented. They've just asked one group, which is just the football team. And they're asking them about equipment. Let me go this way. Okay. So sampling bias, since the sample includes only football fans, fans, it does not represent the whole school body. So perhaps a random sample from the entire school body would give it unbiased results. Or you can do stratified, maybe you can put all the grades. Okay, so there's multiple answers. You don't want to just go to a group that would obviously want the equipment and ask them if we should spend the money on that as opposed to something else.
What are they asking the students?
Student voice, right? That's what your student council's for, right? Remember when you voted last year? They promised all these things. Oops. So B says, let me read it first. A random poll asks the following question. The proposed casino will produce a number of jobs and economic activity in and around your city, and it will generate revenue for the provincial government. Are you in favor of this forward-thinking initiative, Aiden? Yes. Peter?
That response by.
That is response. So they're influencing you, like they're giving you facts about, oh, look how great this is. It will produce jobs. And they're asking you, are you forward-thinking initiative? Are you in favor of it? They're trying to make it boost it up so that you answer the way you want them to and say yes, of course. Right? Okay. So the question is leading. Okay. Just simply, are you in favor of the proposed casino? Okay. With that, all these facts, the person maybe can think about their own facts that would lead them to say yes or no. Okay. Maybe do their own research. So, see, a science class asks every fifth student entering the cafeteria during all lunches to answer a survey on environmental issues and return the completed survey by the end of lunch. Actually, there could be two types of biases here. Peter?
Repeat non-response, they don't bring it back.
Good. Non-response. Anything else you can think of? You could make cases for different ones in different scenarios, but you have to be able to back it up. Non-response bias is likely, it is likely that only a few students who will receive the survey will return it. One solution would be to wait for a student to finish with the survey and collect it, or conduct an interview with every fifth student instead. The next one, a school principal wants to survey data management students to determine whether having a computer internet access at home improves their success in the course. The principal interviews 5 students from each of the following mark categories. Peter?
That'd be helpful.
That's household, exactly. So since the categories are most likely not equal in size, one group of students may be overrepresented or underrepresented, and therefore skewing the results. Okay. So it's not likely that you have the same amount of students in over 80 as 60 to 80 and below 60. So using a simple random sample or a stratified random sample, the number of students chosen from each mark category would be proportionate to the number of students in each category. So the stratified, okay, where you're grouping them into different groups, perhaps maybe this grouping is not even the best, 80, 60 to 80 and below 60. Maybe they need to do more categories than that and get a proportion from each group. An ad agency in a developing country wants to know the proportion of households has at least one personal computer. One of the agency staff members conducts a survey by calling households randomly selected from a telephone directory. So this would be sampling bias. There could be a significant number of households without telephones or that are not listed in the directory. Okay. Since the households without telephone surveys will overestimate the proportion of households that have computers. Okay. You could also get non-response bias here. Is that what you want to say, Peter? Yeah. Most people will not answer phones. We are talking about developing countries, but people don't even necessarily answer, or they won't want to answer a survey. So that's another one that you could include here. Perhaps going to the houses door to door might give you a more accurate estimate. You could still get a non-response outcome.